And I'm sorry if I'm going to ask a question that you may have already answered, and forgive me, because when we start talking about this, I start hearing blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to understand is with the experiments, I guess what you're trying to find out, the bottom line for me was that the system, that you want to show that the system modifies itself. Is that?
Yeah, it modifies, it makes choices according to our choices based on a theory of constraints on how the system gets rendered.
And
yes.
That comes from the double slit experiment.
Yeah, the double slit is the kind of the fundamental thing that I'm working with. I'm just configured in ways that it's never been done before. So it's a similar kind of experiment, but it's actually a different experiment, but it uses the same double slit concept to get it to work.
And is the computer system self-aware?
Yes.
Okay.
So the computer system, which is, in my book I talk about the big computer, but it's the computer that renders this reality. It's aware. Consciousness is consciousness. It's aware. And it adjusts according to what we do and what we require of it. Now the opposite viewpoint of that is reality is just a big machine. That's where physics is now. It's just a big machine. It's a deterministic machine. If you do this, that will happen. And every time you do this, that will happen, because it's just a machine. And if you could know the state of this machine, if you knew all the particles in the universe and what their, momenta was and the direction they were moving and the state they were in, then you could predict everything that would happen in the universe to the end of time. That's a deterministic machine. It always works in the same way. And that's the opposite viewpoint. I'm saying it's not a dumb machine. It's an aware consciousness that's rendering the virtual reality.
Okay, so then I guess I'm trying to, because I don't understand the system. I looked up what double slit experiments was in Wikipedia. So, and it just went over my head about the light particles and all that, but that's the bottom line, that you're trying to see how
Yes.
it modifies, then
Right.
That it's not random, that it changes and...
Yeah. It's not deterministic, it's not random, it's some thoughtful process that changes as we modify things. It works then differently.
So wouldn't the computer, as a means to self-survival, create like a fail-safe, not to be discovered, or as not to let people figure out that we're in a virtual reality? I mean, I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, in order to have a really good virtual reality, it should be very difficult, if not impossible, to tell that it is a virtual reality. If you can tell it's a virtual reality, then it's not a very good virtual reality. I mean, that's the way virtual reality is. So now the virtual realities that we create are not perfect, because mostly they're just vision and hearing. That's it. But you don't smell it, you don't feel it, you don't taste it. So you got 3 of your senses that aren't engaged. You only have 2 senses engaged. So it doesn't feel entirely real. Yes, you put on the goggles, you may stand on a platform that shakes or wobbles or tilts, so you get a sense of being on a hill or going uphill or whatever. And that's pretty convincing. And if you've been on the rides at Disney World and what's the other one down there?
And over there too.
Huh?
There's a simulator.
Yeah, they got a simulator. If you get in these simulators, you realize they're very effective. They can trick your vision and your hearing into really feeling like you are there participating in it. But they're not as good as our virtual reality. Yeah, so that's that. they try to make it better. But if they could make it so that you could get the smell and the taste and the feeling and all of that, then it would be very difficult for you to tell the virtual reality from this reality. You'd go into that virtual reality and have all the same quality of this reality. Well, now you've got goggles on and you can feel the straps around your head and you've got this and that strapped to you and sensors on your body and you feel all that, so that's not quite real. So what they'd really need to do is just remotely interact with your brain chemistry. That they could duplicate signals in your brain that you moved your muscles and did things. Then they'd have a virtual reality that would be just as real and just as impossible to tell as this one. And in my book, in the last chapter, I talk about Sam's virtual reality emporium. So that is the case, that if it's a good virtual reality, you can't tell that it's a virtual reality. It's a really, really good one. You can't tell. Except when you get to the very fine details of the reality. And now there's a few things that virtual reality can't cover up, like pixels. Virtual reality is going to come in terms of pixels, and if you can look down deep enough, you actually can see that it's pixelated. Nothing's continuous. Things have to go from this value to that value to that value, and it's not in a continuous line, but they jump from pixel to pixel. Well, that'll tell you that it's a virtual reality that is being computed, and there's no way the system can cover that up. So that's one way. And another way is the thing I'm trying to do with my experiments, which if there are constraints on the system as to how it has to maintain the virtual reality, then sometimes you can box it in a corner with those constraints so that it does something unusual and you can tell. Well, that's what the double slit experiment did. It boxed the system in because light as a wave had been known for 100 years. Light as a particle was a new idea. Okay, let's see about this particle. We put the particles through the double slits where if you put a wave through them, you'd get a diffraction pattern. Particles should just go straight through and land behind the slit. So now you've boxed the system in because the system's playing both games, and now you're going to force it to see, which game is it going to play when you put a single particle through a double slit. And it did the impossible by actually taking those single particles that go through the double slits, arranging themselves in a diffraction pattern. And it had to do that so there was no discontinuity between the particle and the wave. So the particle had to act like a wave when you put a lot of them through. So the system was stuck. It needed no discontinuity. If it had a discontinuity, then there would have been a problem. There would be this issue in the world that it wasn't continuous, it wasn't smooth. So the particles, when put in a wave situation like double slits, had to give a wave result. So that is where you box the system in and force it to make a choice. And by that choice, it'll tell you something. Had those particles not made a diffraction pattern, then there would have been this problem of light's a wave, light's a particle, but they're different. One doesn't lead into the other. And that would have been a discontinuity. Or it could make the particles act like the waves by distributing in a diffraction pattern. And now you've got something that happened that's not explainable, kind of magic or a miracle, but that's better than actually having a discontinuity, because all that is a big question mark. But what about the idea of the system not wanting to be discovered, which is kind of where you're going? Yes, it doesn't want to be obviously a virtual reality. On the other hand, that's only from the perspective of the avatar. So if you're in it, it needs to be as perfect as it can be. But we're consciousness. We're not just the player of an avatar. We're consciousness. And as consciousness, we can do other things besides just make choices for our avatar. We are aware as consciousness. And as such, we can explore all of conscious reality. All the larger conscious system, it's our playground. We can explore it, we can learn how to use it, we can connect with it. That's all available to us as consciousness. But once we're logged on and only experiencing what our avatar experiences, then the virtual reality needs to be as good as it can get, where you really can't tell it's a virtual reality. The system has a good reason to help us realize that we're consciousness, because we're here to grow up, we're here to lower our entropy, we're here to become love. And the more we see our existence as a big picture, the more likely it is we're going to grow up. When you see yourself, when you see life only as a little picture, you tend to be self-focused, self-centered. That's what it is like to be in a little picture. As your picture gets bigger, then other people, other things, the environment, critters, all sorts of things become significant and important. It's not just you. And the more you understand that these other people and critters and environment is really a part of a bigger whole, just as you are a part of this bigger whole, you stop identifying yourself at the center of the universe. You start identifying you are kind of one, you're part of a much bigger thing. That leads you to caring about these other things that are parts of you and everything. That leads you to being less self-centered. That leads you to caring, leads you to empathy. So it leads you to cooperation, because now you see yourself as just part of a bigger whole. And that whole will work a whole lot better if we cooperate and care. That's pretty obvious. So seeing the bigger picture is what the system wants us to do. It really would like us to see a bigger picture rather than just be trapped in this physical thing. But as long as we are experiencing just what the avatar experiences, it needs to be a really good virtual reality, which means very hard to tell. But we're supposed to grow past that point of just being, the thing that makes choices for the avatar. We're supposed to see ourselves in a bigger picture. But how do you see yourselves in a bigger picture? It has to be in a bigger picture with other things. Seeing yourself as a bigger picture, like I'm the bigger center of a bigger universe, isn't helpful. You're still self-centered, you're still self-focused. So you have to see it in the context of being connected with other. So you need the virtual reality to give you the context, which then one day you can grow up and look at that context and see the bigger picture and you as a part of it. So yes, the virtual reality tries hard not to look like a virtual reality, but at the same time, the system wants you to see it as a bigger picture. Not necessarily a virtual reality, but just see it as a bigger picture. I come at it from a logical, scientific viewpoint, so I talk about virtual reality. But if you just come about it from the point of caring about people, it gets you to the same place. Mostly in the West, we have a hard time with that. In the West, we like logical process. We like to think our way into a spot. So the virtual reality concept gives us a stepping stones to get there, to see the bigger picture. But it's not a necessary concept. It's just necessary that you see yourself as part of something larger, that you see yourself as a player, not the master. That's important. And you don't need virtual reality for that. You just need to grow up. But if you like logical process and you need a logical way to get there, and it needs to be rational, then understanding it as a virtual reality is a path that will take you there rationally and let you see how the bigger machine works. So I'm a physicist and I needed a rational process to get there. So then I spent 40 or 50 years trying to figure out what the rational process is, because any process, any logical system has to have a logical process. It's there, it needs to be there. You don't necessarily need to know it in order to grow up, but it's got to be there. Otherwise, the system's not rational. It's haphazard. There is no continuity. There's no what's the word? There's no connectedness to it. So there's a logical process in there someplace. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what it is and how it works, which is what I did, trying to understand the nature of reality from a logical process viewpoint. So did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That was beautiful.
Okay, good.